Often when people think about socialism, they have this perception of it as a repressive ideology that is willing to trample over individual freedoms in order to achieve a sort of sweeping equalisation. This is a very flawed take, however, most likely as a result of the lasting effects of Red Scare propaganda and the general perception of states such as the USSR and China. Though whether or not that perception is warranted, I can't say. I don't know enough either way, and I don't feel like angering tankies. Regardless, all that socialism is, basically, is the worker ownership of the means of production. And this is different from communism, which is, at least as I define it, a classless, stateless, moneyless society. You can achieve socialism by a great many different approaches. You could try to transition the economy to one based upon worker cooperatives, or you could do the good old-fashioned grabbing your pitchfork and seizing the means yourself. And there are other such solutions as well. And even just on a theory level, there are a great many different branches within socialism, and they each value different things for different reasons, and one of the things that some branches really, really, really value is individual freedom. In this video, all I seek to do is demonstrate that socialism can centre individual freedom in its considerations, and to do that we'll be taking a look at the anarchist branch of socialism, specifically anarchist communism, though all anarchism is in some way socialist, and ANCAPs can suck it. That's not anarchy, that's feudalism. Sorry. So I hear you asking, what even is anarchist communism? Well, essentially, it's an ideology that prioritises the abolition of both the state and the private ownership of the means of production. That's really all there is to it. As Alexander Berkman puts it, in a nutshell then, the meaning of communist anarchism is this: the abolition of the government, of coercive authority and all its agencies, and joint ownership, which means free and equal participation in the general work and welfare. But what does that have to do with individual freedom? Well, in order to explain that, we're going to have to take a look at some of the anarchist communist criticisms of the state and private ownership. What about them stands in the way of individual freedom to the degree that they ought to be wholly cast off? Let us first take the private ownership of the means of production. What about that could possibly limit people's individual freedom when it is so often lauded as the only way to ensure it? A capitalist might argue that the free market is the best way to ensure freedom through choice. You see, capitalists think that being able to choose between a million different brands of Weetabix is the ultimate expression of individual freedom, though they don't seem to recognise the glaring problem of being put in the position where you have to take whatever poorly paid job is offered to you, or starve, so that you can't even afford the shittiest of off-brand Weetabix. Truly, a dilemma for the ages. They'll argue that you should just retrain, or keep looking, or start your own business. However, that, for most people, isn't really an option. And even if it were an option, the way the economy is structured and functions is dependent on there being people taking poorly paid jobs or being unemployed. Capitalists have to pay their workers as little as they can get away with in order to maximise profits of their business. And the economy does really benefit from having unemployed people around to fill labour shortages should they occur. If everyone were employed, there would be no desperate people to scab for them. This is a Marxist idea referred to as the Industrial Reserve Army, if you want to find out more about it. But yeah. So essentially, capitalism is enforcing these poor conditions on poorly paid and unemployed people, and in turn, stripping away their individual freedom. You can't just choose not to be poor, even if you'd really like to. Even if you're trying really, really hard to get a better paid job or get a job at all. It's the economy requires there to be some winners and some losers. The anarchist communist, however, recognises this problem. As Emma Goldman puts it, property, the dominion of man's needs, the denial of the right to satisfy his needs. Essentially, there is no real freedom when private ownership is in play. There's only one choice: work or starve. Kropotkin suggested that the root evil of capitalism isn't that workers are having their surplus value extracted by their bosses, but more the fact that that's even an option to do so in the first place. As the fact of surplus value being an option to take requires that men, women and children are compelled by hunger to sell their labour for a small part of what this labour produces. The key word here being hunger. Workers are put in a position where they have no other choice but to allow the surplus value to be extracted, otherwise they'll starve. If there wasn't a risk of destitution and starvation in play in the economy, then why would anyone allow someone else to take part of the value of their labour when they haven't done anything to earn it? The choice presented, work or starve, is coercive, and it's a false choice. And even sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, that's not even an option for some people. So what about the state? The state is an institution that is oft held up as the only thing standing between civilised society and outright chaos and destruction. But the anarchist communists would argue otherwise. Goldman suggests that the government and the state are dependent on violence and coercion to maintain themselves, and as a result are not only harmful, but unnecessary. She argues that the true purpose of the state is not to uphold order and justice, but only to maintain or protect property and monopoly. She goes on to say, order derived through submission and maintained by terror is not much of a safe guarantee, yet it is the only order that governments have ever maintained. And personally, I'd like to live my life without a CIA boot on my throat. Actually, forget I said anything. Anyway, as Max Weber says, the state has a monopoly of the legitimate use of violence, which the anarchist communists would oppose as restricting the individual freedoms of the people. Enrico Malatesta questioned this consolidation of power by the state by asking, why abdicate our own freedom, our own initiative, into the hands of a few individuals? Why empower them to arrogate the power of all to themselves, with or without the consent of the individual, and to do with what they will? He further questions the state's claim to power, suggesting that the formation of states, be that as a result of war, conquest, or revolution, is illegitimate, and that as a result, the people have no real assurance that the state in question will, prioritise the general usefulness or even what the people themselves desire. And if the state does not take this into mind, then the people have no recourse, and the only way for the people to get rid of a state they don't like is through violence and force. He goes on to address those governments in power due to elections. He criticises them for being nothing more than a matter of numbers, of appealing to the majority, which is assuredly no proof either of equity, reason, or competence. As a result of this system, the minority of the country, which may very well be just under half, have their concerns cast aside. And anarchist communist criticisms of the state aren't just limited to capitalist states. Many theorists make reference to the failings of the USSR, and Emma Goldman herself produced 2 essays on the topic. In her work, My Disillusionment in Russia, she says, I saw before me the Bolshevik state, formidable, crushing every constructive revolutionary effort, suppressing, debasing, and disintegrating everything. Though, as I mentioned earlier, I desire no beef with the tankies, and I think I'll just leave it at that for today. Considering anarchist communist criticisms of the state and private ownership, how do they suggest we move forward? And how do we, in that process, continue to prioritise the individual freedom of the people, as well as the well-being of all? Now, fair warning, a lot of the oncoming theory can sound a little bit utopian and a bit hippy-dippy, but I would argue that that kind of applies to ideas of capitalism and meritocracy as well. Capitalists postulate that it is a perfect system where everyone gets out what they put in and that a healthy dose of competition keeps the world turning, but they fail to reckon with the internal tensions of their ideology and are willing to disregard economic catastrophes and other such problems that arise from those tensions as a mere blip. I personally don't even really see all that much of a problem with theory coming off as a bit utopian, as when you're theorising, you're trying to find the best world possible. You're trying to come up with the way to get there, and it's alright if you're a bit happy and optimistic about it, And I would argue that applies to pretty much all ideology. You're trying to find a way to build a better world, and that's a good thing. Even if your ideology is objectively shit, your heart's in the right place at least. You just gotta get better ideas. So I'd argue that you at least keep an open mind when you're listening to this anarchist theory. Thank you. So, Enrico Malatesta once said, organisation is only the practice of cooperation and solidarity, the natural and necessary condition of social life. His point being that organisation is a natural part of the human experience and doesn't really need to be forced by any authority such as the state. Malatesta argued that we can have a functioning and organised society without the oppression and coercion of the state. Abolition of the government does not and cannot signify destruction of the social bond. Quite the opposite. The cooperation which today is forced and which today is directly beneficial to a few will be free, voluntary and direct, working to the advantage of all, and will be all the more intense and effective for that. He suggested that, as a result of freedom from the oppression of the state, people's natural inclination towards solidarity would flourish, and that people would be able to work together for the betterment of everyone. But not only that, they would also be more able to prioritize their own self-interest. And these ideas are a staple within anarchist communist theory. Kropotkin asserted an idea similar in his work Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution, wherein he suggested that as a result of humanity's natural inclination towards cooperation and solidarity, we were able to build societies and evolve to the point that we are now. In Kropotkin's other work, The Conquest of Bread, he puts forward the idea of free agreement. We have come to believe that man would tear his fellow man to pieces like a wild beast the day the police took his eyes off him, that chaos would come about if authority were overthrown during a revolution, and with our eyes shut we pass by thousands and thousands of human groupings which form themselves freely, without any intervention of the law, and attain results infinitely superior to those achieved under governmental tutelage. He then gives the example of the interconnected railways throughout Europe and Russia, which were formed without governmental dictation as a result of companies coming together of their own accord and, in the end, creating an astoundingly effective system. He contrasts this with the efforts of Tsar Nicholas I, which turned out to be quite an expensive waste, as within a few years all the expensive railway tracks had to be abandoned. Kropotkin saw this as an example of how an anarchist communist society might work in the future, with people coming together of their own inclination to work not just for the betterment of themselves, but everyone. And he applied this idea not just to the production of necessities, but also to luxuries and personal fulfillment. In The Conquest of Bread, Kropotkin detailed calculations which demonstrated that in order to ensure that everyone was clothed, fed and sheltered, each person would need only work 4 or 5 hours a day until they were 50. Of course, it is important to keep in mind that these calculations were done in the 1800s, and that productivity has continued to grow since then. In fact, since the 1950s alone, productivity has grown 252.9%, and as an aside, wages have been stagnating since the 1970s despite this growth in productivity. If we were to take this growth in productivity into account, each person would likely need only work 3 or 4 days a week, compared to Kropotkin's original suggestion of 6 days a week. This shorter work week would allow people much greater time and opportunity to pursue their passions, be that science, art, sport, or any hobby that takes their fancy really, such as producing disgusting, depraved, and downright degenerate Mass Effect self-insert fanfic porn. Kropotkin suggested that to satisfy such desires, societies would spring up wherein people would donate their free time to assist other people in pursuing similar passions in return for assistance in their own pursuits. He gives the example of a writer society, wherein people help out with the printing presses and as editors to ensure that their own books receive printing and editing, so that anyone who wants their novel disseminated can have it happen. Such a system would allow much of the population who previously would not have had the opportunity to do so pursue their passions, which typically is a privilege only afforded to those already with the wealth to do so, or those that are willing to risk destitution and starvation. Now, there is one quote that I feel perfectly encapsulates these ideas. It is a bit of a long one, but I think it's worth listening to. So, take it away, Emma Goldman. Anarchism's goal is the freest possible expression of all of the latent powers of the individual. Oscar Wilde defines a perfect personality as one who develops under perfect conditions, who is not wounded, maimed, or in danger. A perfect personality, then, is only possible in a state of society where man is free to choose the mode of work, the conditions of work, and the freedom to work, one to whom the making of a table, the building of a house, or the tilling of the soil is what the painting is to the artist and the discovery to the scientist, the result of inspiration, of intense longing, and deep interest in work as a creative force. That being the ideal of anarchism, its economic arrangements must consist of voluntary productive and distributive associations, gradually developing into free communism as the best means of producing with the least waste of human energy. Anarchism, however, also recognises the right of the individual or numbers of individuals to arrange at all times for other forms of work in harmony with their tastes and desires. Whew! That was a long voiceover. But at the end of all this, what have we learned? Hopefully that anarchism is cool and correct, and now you're all going to become jaywalking punk anarchists like me.
Hey, I know you! You're that jaywalking punk anarchist!
At least if you care about individual freedom, that is. Jokes aside though, I hope that I've been able to demonstrate that socialism need not trample over your rights, and ignore your needs and desires in the effort to create a more equitable world. Quite frankly, I find the notion ridiculous, though I do understand where it comes from. Regardless, I just want to thank you for sticking about for as long as you have and listening to me nerd out about anarchist theory for fucking way too long. I hope to continue making videos like this, probably more about anarchism and communism and socialism. I have a few more ideas for future videos, such as taking a wee look at the work of Max Stirner, or having a look at some more niche anarchist ideas, such as anti-civilization. So if you're interested in seeing more from me, please do subscribe, and I would appreciate any constructive criticism that you have. I know that this video is far from perfect, but I hope to keep learning. Oh, and before you go, if anyone's interested, I have listed all of my references in the description. Okay, thanks. Bye!